Well, I think everyone considers themselves an expert in love if they've been touched by the muses, and we tend still to think it's merely the provenance of young people or poets, musicians, artists, and writers. And we're still fascinated by it. Look at the top type of fiction genre. It is romance. And how many songs? Everything is about love. The one time we do pay attention to it is when a friend of ours suddenly is euphoric, has compulsions, loses self-control, all sorts of things, butterflies, and they're in love. And this is the clinical manifestation. When I used to teach this, I would actually teach it in a medical context. And I'll come back to this later, that love was thought to be an affliction. So when you have all of this euphoria, cold sweat, butterflies in your stomach, romantic love, that's our diagnosis. It's nearly, notice I put an emphasis on that, it's nearly universal. And both men and women are equally affected. And it can happen anytime. And it also is short-lived when we talk about romance. It's a very short-lived phenomenon. Scientifically, if we're going to deal with it, how do we deal with it? You have to define it, first of all. And it really is difficult to define, even in your own life. And think the poets are still writing and the singers are just singing about the wonders and the mysteries. What is love? It is a complex interaction of brain chemicals, hormones, but why? These things have been selected for in evolutionary sense and in sexual sense and in social sense, basically to help us pair, to bond, to mate, but more importantly, to parent. And evolutionary wise, it's there so that we will have and see our children to the point where they marry and have children. That is what is called inclusive fitness. You pass half of your genes on to your children, but your genetic line may end unless your children have children. And so when evolution talks about the survival of the fittest, it doesn't mean who gets born, but who gets to reproduce. So this is what science agrees upon, that it is near universal, and it does have a complex neurology behind it, hormones, emotional, behavioral, and cultural aspects to it. There's hard sciences now that have only recently begun to look at love through hormones, through neurotransmitters, and of course from evolution. And it has long been the province of philosophers and from sociologists, psychologists, and even anthropologists looking at the differences between love in different cultures. I have to put this caveat, and I include myself in this, that the less we know about something, the more experts there will be. And you can point to a lot of things like nutrition or diets or many, many experts. And we will see there are self-proclaimed experts in love. And when you're talking about the brain and the human heart and the human behavior, nothing is simple. And almost nothing is normal. Normal in science is a wide variation, and it refers to things that are normally distributed, what you know as a bell curve. And normal does not refer to the average or the mode, the most common number, it means this variation. So when we talk and try to pin things down and even into regions of the brain, it can't be that precise. And people have always tried to figure out, I love all these quotes. And of course, Woody Allen has the final say in all of these, love creates tension and sex relieves it. This is really a recent kind of field for science, and it was also thought it was beyond science. The first hormone really wasn't discovered until 1900, basically. A few more hormones, and then the big hormones in the 60s, and a way to look at the brain. The functional magnetic resonance imager was first developed and employed in research in 1990. And that's when all of these studies start. And we're not sure what they actually show, but they can help us at least try to understand how complicated this is and what's going on. So we're going to start with the hormones, the endocrine system. It's very complex, but there are many different glands that are scattered all over the place. We tend to think of the gonads, the testes in male, or the ovaries in female, but these are activated and regulated by the brain and special areas in the brain, the hypothalamus, and then this tiny little thing called the pituitary. And here is the hypothalamus, and then this tiny little thing that is like about the size of an almond that hangs down, and the whole brain interacts at this point, and any emotion, any brain activity can potentially affect this so that it will release some sort of hormone. And this is called the hypothalamus pituitary axis. And additionally, there'll be cranial nerves that come off the brain that go to different organs, but the hormones are released into the bloodstream. They act a little slower, and they usually have some targets. For instance, what we view as crucial in humans, the gonads, but what turns them on and what regulates them is actually pituitary hormones. And the hypothalamus itself responds to all sorts of emotions, but also nutrition and stress and circadian rhythm and light. Light is incredibly important. Falling on the brain or falling on the skull, being sensed by the brain, not necessarily the eyes. For instance, right now we're getting a lot of sun, but we may not be making enough serotonin right now because we're not getting enough sun falling on our skin or eyes or brain. And so we may have seasonal affective disorder. Estrogen, we tend to think is the main, well, it is the main feminizing hormone. It does about 100 different things in the blood. It regulates cholesterol. It helps a woman develop in her shape, the breasts, the subcutaneous fat, and so on. It has some difficulties because it isn't, if it disappears, it may actually delete the bones of calcium and so on. But it isn't, it's feminizing. And ironically, this is the mammalian default. It's the set point for mammals. And if you say this was discovered, say, taking the testes out of little rabbits, embryo rabbits, they develop as females. So that's the set point. This is a little complicated, but what I want to point out here, this is the menstrual cycle, which is rather complicated. It shows both these hormones, which are from the pituitary, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. These are directly from the pituitary. They go to the ovary and they cause estrogen and progesterone to be produced. And you notice how both of these things will climb and decline and climb again during a monthly cycle of a woman. So one of the crucial things is you see this little peak around mid-cycle, in the menstrual cycle. And that peak then declines, and then this little spike from a pituitary hormone called luteinizing hormone, that's when ovulation occurs. And then another hormone is produced to bring progesterone online. But the crucial thing about this for us is that once estrogen drops in the menstrual cycle, testosterone rises. Women have testosterone, and actually it is this rise in testosterone that turns the female libido on. And that makes sense in evolution. Here is the egg suddenly present, and the woman should be more inclined. And the woman is prettier. These are generated by different images through a computer. It's a composite, but it shows that a woman during her mid-cycle is generally viewed as more attractive because the estrogen is fleshing out her face. And she also, when you ask her at this point, she tends to want more children. Over a lifetime, estrogen, of course, every cycle goes up and down and up and down, but eventually you run out of the number of eggs you can produce because you're born with a limited number. And then estrogen, which is normally coming out of the ovary, declines. And that, of course, is menopause. One curious thing about our society now, the beginning of this cycle used to be in 1900s was around 17. Right now, in the Western world, depending where you are, it is down to 11 years. So age of menarche is dropping and dropping. Now, what happens with men? Well, testosterone has a bad rap because it's there from the beginning, because the testes are activated and begin to produce testosterone. It affects the brain growth in many different ways. It is associated with increased sex drive, but it isn't produced in great amounts until puberty hits in boys. So you can see, again, you have a puberty in boys, and that's when they get very interested in things. But testosterone does lots and lots of functional things, like it makes the sperm, it regulates erection and also the prostate growth, but it's also big for bone and muscle. Now, women have testosterone. It enhances, doesn't control completely their libido. So there's a lot of marketing that goes on. Women need testosterone. Well, number of studies which gave women either a plain patch with a little Vaseline on it, and they were told this could be testosterone, you won't know. And then other women were given real testosterone patches, and they let them go on, and then they compared, and both women all the women felt their libido increase. So this is, of course, a placebo effect. So if I give you something and say there's testosterone, you tend to have your own elevation in libido. You don't need extra testosterone. Later, your testosterone levels will be unmasked. Estrogen hides them quite a bit. Women, when they become romantically involved, their testosterone naturally increases and tends to stay high, not just at the middle of their cycle. Ironically, men, the testosterone decreases. And if you think about that, what do you want the man to do? Cuddle. He's more inclined to be physical and hug, kiss, and those are controlled by different hormones. So you don't want his testosterone necessarily to be up. So those are hormones. They tend to be slow. They travel by the bloodstream. They regulate all sorts of things, growth and maturation and normal organ running. But the brain and the nervous system releases neurotransmitters, which because of their chemical nature, create an electrical impulse, and they move very, very rapidly. So the next, I'm going to talk about some of these neurotransmitters, and dopamine is probably the most important because it's a high energy, reward-based neurotransmitter that's related to basically kind of like a psychotropic, what is it, amphetamine. And when you fall in love, dopamine surges, it increases your libido, your arousal, your focus, your attention. And when you fall out of love, it can crash. And boy, falling out of love can be really, really nasty for many people. So you can see it looks like adrenaline. It also looks like amphetamine. Low levels of dopamine are also associated with Parkinson's and schizophrenia and so on. But during love, boy, the dopamine spikes. And there's a whole area of the brain that is receptive to this dopamine. This is called the reward pathway. And even though it's produced down here in the nucleus accumbens and the VTA, the dopamine spreads throughout the brain. And this is why you feel so aroused. Now, you have to be able to make dopamine. That's made in the pituitary. The signals are made there. Then you also have to be able to receive it. So genes regulate how many receptors you have. And so this is a gene that is that makes the receptor proteins throughout your body, in the brain and elsewhere. But there are a number of different variations. So if you get lots of variations in this particular part of your gene, you tend to not make as much you can't receive as much dopamine. So you need extra stimulus to feel the same kind of rush. So you look for adventure sports, and you go from one relationship to the other, trying to saturate yourself with dopamine. So we now know that if we do a gene profile, and if you have one of these variations, you're more likely to cheat. And some people advertise this. I have dopamine receptor number 4 that has 7 variable number tandem repeats. And I don't mind mountain climbing or kayaking. I like to travel. And sometimes this is called the Wonderless Gene. Partly because when you look at where it is, this gene came with us 100,000 years ago when humans spread out of Africa. And you can see all of this blue. That's a high variation of the dopamine receptor gene. And you can buy a genome test to test your partner to see if they're likely to cheat on you. Easy to love, easy to use mouth swabs to test your partner. Boy, science maybe isn't always that good for us. Serotonin, of course, is a neurotransmitter that affects moods, especially when there's not enough serotonin. Then we get very depressed, but it also regulates sleep. And in fact, most antidepressants like Prozac are called called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They keep the serotonin in the synapse so that you feel better. And unfortunately, when you fall in love, serotonin tends to decline. But then you have the dopamine. You may not sleep as much. And in men will also decline in this. Endorphins, endorphins are natural painkillers. They're you wonder why opium and opiates like morphine and heroin work in our brain. It's because we produce our own natural opiate. And so there's a receptor for it. So heroin works in us. When you fall in love, this hormone, endorphins, uh, gives us this kind of heroin euphoria. And it can be tough when you're falling out of love because you're used to this as well. When you exercise, you can produce a lot of endorphins, and sometimes you get beyond the pain that your exercise is producing. So this is what is called the runner's high. But endorphins are very important in the early stages, as is norepinephrine, which is essentially an adrenaline type of hormone, which increases your appetite, or decreases your appetite, but increases your energy and euphoria. So this is another one. In young love, it causes a lot of blushing. And Mark Twain once said, humans are the only animals that blush or need to. Oxytocin, this has got a lot of press, and oxytocin is produced by the hypothalamus, stored in the pituitary. It's a complex protein. It reacts through human social interaction from birth to adulthood, mostly in response to physical contact, being touched. You need 7 hugs a day. Remember this in our COVID isolation. You need 7 hugs a day. And what have people done? Of course, they got pets. And everyone has a dog or a pet now. It is sometimes called the cuddling hormone, but what it does, normally released by the pituitary, and it causes birth. The main function of oxytocin is, where are we? It causes contraction of the uterus. And then it causes the milk to be let down. And once the baby suckles, the baby gets oxytocin, and it continues to feed back to the mom, so she continues to suckle. And this is then the bonding hormone. And there's a similar one called vasopressin, which acts to basically enhance the pair bond. But early on, it's also used in partner selection. And that's a little bit hard to understand. But vasopressin also works to regulate kidney function. Now, again, there are variants in both of these genes that make, especially oxytocin. And it's been shown that 60% or 40% of women may have these variants. And guess what? When you look at these variants, don't worry about the details here. If you have particular variants that we can tell, you again are likely to cheat, have extramarital or extra relationships. And of course, then this becomes something that is marketed. You can get a DNA infidelity test that's going to assess the oxytocin variant, and this is the variant. And do we need to know this? Should you find out whether you're likely to be unfaithful? The real kind of puppy love, the teenage love, when you fall in love, there is a new hormone that's released called phenylethylalanine. And it is produced in the hypothalamus. You get a big surge of it early in the attraction. It will cause the butterflies, because these things go elsewhere in your body. The brain is connected to the heart and the intestines and everything else in the stomach. And it causes a very strong amphetamine-like euphoria. But it also can increase obsessive compulsive disorder and panic. So some of it, by the way, there's a similar amount of, or a small amount of phenylethylamine found in chocolate. So often when people are heartbroken, they turn to chocolate. Another hormone that we don't think that's, well, it's an odd hormone because it affects a lot of different things, mostly the cardiovascular system. Nitric oxide, which is a gas, and it is used, well, it's a hormonal gas, but it causes vasodilation for the blood vessels to open. And this is what the sex enhancer, Viagra, causes vasodilation of the penis and causes erection. It is produced in the, and released in seminal fluid. So it also works in the vaginal canal and the uterus. So if you kind of have a kind of gauges, testosterone will go up in women, but down in men. Phenylethylamine, you get this surge and the euphoria and energy when you first fall in. And this is added to by the dopamine, and then endorphins will help you get through everything. Now, I'm going to switch gears to a little tiny lemming-like mouse. And what may come as a surprise that 95% of all mammals which have hair and mammary glands and nurse their young, are promiscuous. So there's virtually no pair bonding and there's no parenting. However, neighboring kinds of species may be completely promiscuous, but there is one tiny little species called the prairie vole. They are highly afflicted. They love to mate. They love to stay with each other. They guard each other. The male will even cut the umbilicus of the female. He will lick and take care of the young, and he will raise multiple generations of his own young. And they tend to mate for life. So here is a very strange case of monogamy in a mammal, and it may be surrounded by neighboring kinds of voles, but it's going to be monogamous. And you can experimentally manipulate this, and it's really strange. You can genetically alter them so that they don't produce what do you think they have. They like to cuddle, they like to be with each other, they nurse, they parent, they have lots of oxytocin and lots of vasopressin. If you block those genes, they don't stay monogamous. If you take another vole that is promiscuous and you inject oxytocin, they turn loving. And this is some of the research that happens in the male and the female are different. That is, here is the oxytocin, and here's the vasopressin. These are sections of the brain that show they're much more amplified in the monogamous prairie vole than they are in the polygynous mountain vole. And when you look at the genes for oxytocin in mammalian evolution, there was a primitive form of oxytocin, and then somewhere along the line, probably in the order of 400 million years ago, it duplicated. Quite often genes will just double, and one will change slightly, but you have a double dose of it. And so this is what has happened in mammalian evolution, both to vasopressin and to oxytocin. And they've duplicated themselves and become more expressive in mammals. So mammals are much more, well, they're promiscuous, but they have to nurse and pair bond in order to bring their babies off. And you see here where the oxytocin doubled, and it's there, become very abundant in mammals, but also birds. And birds are, as you may know, are monogamous in general. And of course, someone's going to try to make a buck off of it. So you can put a few drops in the guy's cocktail, and he's going to want to maybe cuddle with you. He will be more attracted to you. You can have it as a nasal spray. You can use it as, if you're heartbroken, people use it that way. And of course, if you can see up here, if you're a dairy farmer and your heifer is having difficult delivery, you inject her with oxytocin and the uterus will contract. And you can use it with humans as well. So inducing labor in mammals uses oxytocin. So here it is, nasal spray, drops, whatever. And here it is, the trust pheromone. So if you go out on a date, you spray him and he will hold you closer. So here are some of the chemicals involved and the neurotransmitters. And testosterone is the main one for sexual libido. Dopamine is a reward system, so is epinephrine. Serotonin, it's a complex one because it often declines. Oxytocin is a cuddle, if you want to call it cuddle hormone, and vasopressin is for pair bonding. And this is the great euphoric reward system. Now, we'll talk about this next time. Pheromones. These are chemicals that are produced, they're produced by us, but they work external to us. They're released by the pubic region, by the axillary region, and even just by the sweat. Now, we don't, that's what a dog is smelling when they come up to you. And that's what your mother smells to you when she puts her face in your neck and nuzzles you. That is very important. We tend to think we are not animals, but we are animals, and all animals know that. They smell us. Even octopuses taste us and know if they like us or not. So pheromones are external hormones, many times involved in sex and in dominance, and also in marking and other things. We'll talk about them the next time. So there's many things going on in love. There are gene expressions, and not everyone has the same expression for oxytocin or vasopressin, or maybe you don't even produce phenylethylalanine. But there's also neural levels that work in the brainstem, that work in the hypothalamus, the fear center, and so on. And then we have learned how to fall in love, how to be parents. We have learned this. We've been taught trust. We've been taught empathy, concern. All of these things, our social milieu influences our falling in love and how we stay in love. Now, just a quick background. This was very popular, the Triune Brain. And this is Paul MacLean, who realized that when you look at animal brain development, there's virtually nothing in a shark. It is basically a feeding machine. It uses odors and so on. Likewise, the frog's brain is very limited, but eventually reptile brain develops a lot of ability, and it's very primitive, it's instinctual. Birds develop a little bit of what we call cortex, but mammals really develop this cortex. So the brainstem is still sort of left over from reptiles, and it is our instincts, our drives. Then there is a mammalian brain, which is the emotional center. And it was there. It's in older mammals, but it's also still in us. It's called the limbic system. And then in humans, especially primates and humans, the neocortex is expanded. This was made popular by Carl Sagan back in the 70s. And this triune brain has fallen out of popularity to some degree, but it's still a very good thing to kind of use as a model. So the limbic system here in colored is our emotional center. It also facilitates our learning, and it's also a fundamental area for the pleasure and reward system, and also orgasm. So this is the old mammalian brain, but this is the thing that pretty much controls love. But with additions like the dopamine reward and the serotonin reward and so on. Now, just for fun, love to show you what a male brain looks like. No. Or a female brain. Well, no, I think maybe the shoe area is that big. I'm not sure. But anyway, the brain in love, and you have to understand that this is one person's interpretation using what is called functional magnetic resonance imaging, which basically picks up how much oxygen is coming out of the blood in these particular places. The attraction seems to be regulated to some degree by the hypothalamus, but also this nucleus up here, the nucleus accumbens, and then dopamine release is released there. Likewise, the ventral tegmental area, there's a big dopamine release area. And then emotional attachment, which comes a little bit later. There's sort of a sequence, and everyone knows this. There's sexual attraction, then the romance develops, and eventually, hopefully, some sort of attachment will develop. And that's largely the ventral pallidum. This is one interpretation, and I don't buy it all completely, just simply because it's too restrictive in many ways. And this is how these are recorded. Science, you have to publish your idea, you publish your methods, and hopefully then other people will do the same thing and get the same results. Well, the method here is the volunteer is put into a functional magnetic resonance imager. Some of you have had this done maybe for your knee or whatever. And then while they're in there, you show them a picture of your sweetheart. And then they look at your brain. And if you're madly in love with your sweetheart, these are some of the areas that light up. And you notice here's the ventral tegmental area right next to the hypothalamus. Then what do they do? Well, they show you someone you know. And these areas may not be as bright. Then they show you someone you don't know, and they won't necessarily light up. Well, what is that showing you exactly? And can this be replicated, which is a crucial thing? Some people love to say, yes, this is replicated all the time, but it isn't. And is this all that love is? There's a few areas that light up. That means that they're getting oxygen and then they release a hormone into the hypothalamus. We don't know. One thing we do know, and they often don't take into consideration, is the fact that testosterone will affect the male brain. Now, where's my little cursor? And one of the things that will happen is the spatial areas of the brain are much more developed, and the two hemispheres are much more developed, and they don't communicate. They tend to be one-sided. whereas females actually have more connections between the two hemispheres. And this may actually, if you think about it, you do this, this is your brain, you're looking at yourself, and you can open up the top of your brain, but here is the connection, the corpus callosum that holds your two hemispheres together. And you've heard of the right brain, the left brain, and yes, there are differences in what regulates those. But when you look at females, this area is much more, many more neurons running back and forth. So women do think differently and their brain is connected differently. So how do these differ in terms of their romantic response? Plus, they never tell you about how much, when you're in love, is basically shut down. Why do certain areas of the brain shut down? The logic, the reasoning, and so on. So falling in love, you activate a few of the small areas, but then you also shut down some major areas. Well, if you want to look at it in detail, maybe you can see there are more areas that love happens. And lust, as many people are aware, is different. Sexual attraction, lust, is different than falling in love. And people have always recognized this, and the brain recognizes this. And you can see, here, if you're falling in love, dopamine goes up, oxytocin goes up, vasopressin, but some of the others, like serotonin, go down. Now, why did all this develop? Well, we are long-lived animals. We have very few, and primates in general. Primates are what we call K-selected. They're very long-lived. They have few children, and they have long pregnancies and long lactations. And in humans, one of the things that's really elongated is the infancy is elongated. You might even say the juvenile period goes on for 20, 30 years in some cases. And the bond between mother and infant, neonate, is lifelong. And of course, that is instigated by the oxytocin that not only gives birth, but also supports the nursing. So this is the basic bond. And if the the infant is denied that bond, some of you will remember, sadly, Harry Harlow's work with rhesus monkeys, where he deprived the monkey infants of a mother, just gave a wire replica with a bottle in it, and then could go to a wire replica with some fur on it, and those monkeys were messed up for life and they never could mate themselves. So that says something for bonding. This is a very beautiful little story that came out of Vienna Zoo, where its female was nursing and the orangutan came up and on the other side of the plexiglass and just watched her for the longest time and tried to touch her and the baby. And orangutans have the longest nursing period of any primate. Also, if you look at these functional magnetic imaging, here's romantic love, and you notice it's all over. It isn't just one little area here. Yes, the nucleus accumbens is lit up, but look at all these other areas in the logic and the reason and so on. But maternal love is deeper and more emotional, if you will. Now, one thing that, why did all this happen? Well, Richard Dawkins, who is, I think, a very creative thinker, he's a biologist, and he realized that life is insistent. Life, by definition, perpetuates itself. What drives genes? Genes want to make copies of themselves, pass them on to their descendants, and in a sense, they're selfish. And only selfish genes can get passed on. And if love accentuates that, then love will be selected for. And love is a virus. And 40% of human genes are originally derived from viruses. So they're very successful. So the evolution of human bonding requires delivery. We are artificial, that is, we're helpless, and the delivery itself, humans require assisted delivery. Yes, there are people that go off, but there's always a midwife around. There are areas that are used, and we have a long social acclimatization. We have intertribal societies, and if we want to pass our genes on, we have to be committed to long-term bonding. Now, most primates are, well, with the exception of gibbons are monogamous, but most primates, especially gorillas, they're polygynous, and chimps, which are they're wildly promiscuous, and most monkeys are. Humans initially and continually are mildly polygynous, that is, multiple females. Monogamy is a very recent thing. When did love start? Well, I love to look at our expression of love after death. And you see these burials going back, in some cases, 5,000 or 3,000 before present, and the couples were buried together or buried with the child. And again, these burials are 4,000 years old, or 4,000 BP, 6,000 years old. That bespeaks, plus the fact that they were so carefully buried and with treasures and implements and so on, that somebody must have loved someone. And love at least is, who knows, 10, 15,000 years old. It probably goes back to Neanderthals. I think there's a good argument. The other thing about staying together and why life probably came, or love came about, is the fact that, well, I'll go on. Well, no, that's it. In order to assure your paternity, you have to hang around a female, and you have to try to keep other males around. Well, from the female perspective, she has to keep you interested. So she has evolved to hide her ovulation. And that's unique in primates. The ovulation is hidden. How do you tell? Well, some of you are aware that it wasn't long ago we figured out that a slight jump in body temperature will indicate the time when LH is there and estrogen is there and you ovulate. It also changes the mucus consistency. And so this is one way you can ensure fertility, is if you make a note of when ovulation usually occurs. Why did this happen? Well, there are a couple of theories. If the male wants to assure his paternity, then he has to hang around for a long time. If the female wants to hide her rivalry or her potential rivalry with other females, then she can hide this. Also, males probably are very protective of infanticide, because many primates will kill a baby to drive the female into a receptivity. Women generally, and some subtle men, can tell when the woman is ovulated, because remember, it's a spike in estrogen. So she is actually different appearing. She is actually more attractive. Another thing that has been selected for, how do we attract each other? Well, you don't display your genes. You don't give them, here's my 23andMe. You show and flaunt what you have. And if you don't have much, you extend it. And this is called the extended phenotype by none other than Richard Dawkins again. Yes, women form-fitting pants, but even men now can buy pads for their buns, or women buy pads. I did a study one time up in Point Reyes, and I was marking birds, and they changed mates, and I couldn't figure out, why did you do this? And then I realized after a computer analysis, I had banded them with different colors, and they started mating according to what band colors they had. And I noticed my students for a long time would have these wristbands that say, I'm committed to being chaste, or I'm this, and they would pair up according to the color of their bands. This is the extreme and extended phenotype in animals. This is a satin bower bird from Queensland, Australia. They build this lovely little grass bower, and the idea is to attract this kind of green, uninteresting looking female into this where he'll mate with her. But because he's satin, he displays all kinds of blue, anything you can find in the neighborhood. In this case, bottles and caps. In some species, they paint the inside of this, and sometimes they even put blue flowers in this. And of course, we all know what the extended phenotype is. Freudian penis cars. And here is, anyway, they're advertising. And of course, in this case, they also are noisy vehicles. This is what I mean. You don't hide the fact that you're in heat, estrus. Primates, females tend to have massive, colorful genital swellings, and they advertise the fact, and the males will smell them, and they will be receptive. Now, many animals smell each other all the time. Elephant seals, who are north of us right now, when the pup is born, and they're being born just about now, they smell and they imprint on that smell. But animals all imprint on smells. Primates imprint on smells, and they also get close, and when they smell, they also kind of lick. But primates also share food, especially mother and neonate. They share food by mouthing it, chewing it. And this is very likely the origin of kissing, because I did it with my son. And I know many cultures around the world, what did you do before Gerber's? You chewed the food and you spit it in the baby's mouth. And what do our moms do anyway? They feed us, you know. So just imagine, and some people even do this, sharing food on a date, or sharing champagne on a date from mouth to mouth. So kissing is the epitome of romantic love. We love it in art. Here's Gustav Klimt and Edvard Munch. But it's not a universal action. Traditional cultures, less than 46% showed romantic sexual kissing. So it's not even near a human universal. This is looking at old records of what people would like. This is strict definitions of very large sample size. It is not a human universal. And other people do different things. Thailand, the Hom game, you sniff kiss. And you literally are smelling the other person. And many amorous approaches are like that. Sniff kissing. Oops, sorry. Arabian men throughout the Gulf states and children, they will meet each other with a nose kiss. That's the Hongi in New Zealand. Quite often the head touches, forehead touches, and then the nose. And this can be formal or it can be very intimate. And of course, we tend to call this Eskimo kissing, and it also will be upper lip touching and smelling again. And it can be very passionate. I guarantee you, it is very passionate. And of course, I call these pooch smooches because they bring out oxytocin in us. And there are lots of different kinds of acceptable kisses, of course. You can kiss on cheeks, you can blow a kiss on foreheads. I love this. This is Rebecca Sachs. She's at MIT. And she was working on the brain development of infants. And so she brought her own child in and actually got with the baby in an FRI, functional magnetic resonance machine, and they both were scanned. And this is a normal MRI, not a functional. This is a normal MRI. So here she is with her baby. She's holding the baby. But this is the functional MRI. Look at that. That is maternal love and neonatal love, the baby loving her back. Isn't that, that to me is the greatest Valentine going. And you can't get two people in a functional magnetic imaging machine, but a mother and a baby, you can. What else do we kiss? We kiss lots of things: rings, books, sacred objects, and relics. But we also kiss the ground. I have kissed the ground many, many times in Los Angeles, not because of being in Los Angeles, but back. We kiss statues. We kiss the Blarney Stone to get eloquence. And also we rub things. This is, well, I won't talk about that. We kiss trophies. We kiss dice for luck. We kiss a lot of things. And if you were a witch and you met the devil, you had to kiss him in a ritual greeting on the derriere. Ashkenum infam, the shameful kiss. And of course, we still say that. Babies watch who their parents kiss. And that then says, oh, that's someone that's intimate with my parents. They must be related to me. So they keep tabs and will willingly kiss those people they see their parents kiss. So it allows the baby to infer relationships, just watching kissing. I'm not making this stuff up. This is the article, and this is the title and the authors and so on. Now, we do sort of need a paradigm, and this actually is one we all sort of know. I don't like the terms, but, and I'm not sure I follow all of this, but initially we're attracted, various reasons for the attraction, and they're not always lust. But anyway, this is Helen Fisher, who is a self-proclaimed expert, and she is a anthropologist. And she says, okay, this is the first stage. And hopefully your testosterone will be high in both men and women. I don't think estrogen really has that much to do with it, but that's what she says. And of course, dopamine then with the attraction, because there's a reward. And then if you form some attachment, then oxytocin will get you through that. So this is her paradigm. And I said, since she's a TED speaker and written a number of different books. She has her own blog, her own podcast, her own videos. You can sign up for her blog. You can get her speaking engagements and so on and so on. And of course, this is her map. You notice she has, there's her name on it. There's the FRN. But I originally worked with PET scans, and PET scans give you a lot of detail. The difference is that this is kind of invasive because PET scans give you a labeled sugar in the blood. It's mildly isotopic, and you really get a good image. A functional or a structural FM magnetic resonance image just gives you very detailed, but not where the brain is active. The functional magnetic resonance will give you these oxygen absorption areas, but it misses a lot of things. So I have my reservations of how accurate this is. Also, she did a similar imaging with multiple people and found a global involvement in the brain all over the neocortex, not just these deep areas. And so this would explain why these areas will control your breathing, your heart rate, and so on. So I think these are more accurate. And other studies show there's much more going on in the brain than what Helen Fisher shows. Also, the brain has 12 cranial nerves, and number 10, which is the biggest, is called the vagus nerve. It goes all over the body, and this is activated by the brain, and all of these come down to various places like the stomach and the intestines, and there's sort of another brain system in the heart, the sinoatrial node and the atrial ventricular node. These are the things that run the heart beat. So if you have, you kiss someone and your heart flutters, it may actually happen. Dopamine may cause that. Epinephrine may cause that. Phenylethylalanine may cause your heart to race. Also, butterflies in the stomach. So there is a connection. I mean, yes, the brain runs all of this internally, but love can influence how these work. And love can influence what is called the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. This was back in the 70s. John Allen Lees put these Greek words with different colors and said, look, you can match your color with their color and you'll end up coming out this nice green color, and he'll tell you what that means. And there have been many other types. For some reason, people like colors in terms of instead of science, but they're easier to understand. I don't know. This I actually like. Sternberg is a psychologist, and I like this because, well, isn't that a lovely picture of his kids and his young wife? I like this because this is a good talking point, all right? And you come into the triangle at maybe passion, and over time you become intimate, and then over time you may develop a commitment. Doesn't mean you can't become intimate first, and then move to passion, and then move to commitment, or even come in at commitment and move to intimacy. I like this because you can talk about where you think you are. And ideally, if you do this, go to intimacy and commitment, and you basically would have a consummate kind of love. If you just have passion and you're committed to your passion, you sort of have a fatuous love. If you are passionate and intimate, then you would be what we would call a romantic love, or what Sternberg would call this. I like this because it does show that love changes over time, and you may use this to talking about it. Now, for a long, long time, and throughout history, philosophers said that love is bad because it's a sickness. And it was called erotic melancholia for years and years, or erotomania. Long recognized, it was attributed to either black bile or green bile, where it would be called chlorosis. And they just said, by the way, you'll get over this, and this is not the reason to marry. Remembered that. It's not the reason to marry, and nor has it been until very recently. Love has only been approved as a socially approved and by the churches as a reason to marry in the last maybe 300 years. And what happens? Oh, it's a depressive disease typified by sadness, insomnia, despondency, dejection. Probably everyone has gone through some element of it. Erotic melancholia, love sickness. There's even a wonderful term called limerence to describe kind of what we used to call puppy love. And when you look at somebody's brain with a functional MRI, it looks just like an addict trying to recover. This is an addictive brain, and that's what happens when somebody's going through this. Now, I've taught a number of courses on human history, and I also have a keen interest in petroglyphs, that is, the images that humans have made over time, back in the Paleolithic to Neolithic. And these are sometimes called vulvar drawings, and they are thought to represent the genitalia, the external genitalia of women. You don't see hearts in petroglyphs. Now, why? And where is the first time we see something that looks like a heart? Well, this is from early Libya, where it was actually a coin of the realm produced by the Greeks in their colony of Cyrene, which is where they got a plant called silphium. And silphium seeds were exported, and exported so much that this plant is virtually extinct in North Africa. But what it was an abortifacient. It was used to induce abortions. Yet many people think that this was converted into the first heart image. So ironically, the first heart image maybe has to do with abortions. Early anatomical depictions of hearts are really bizarre. What were they looking at? And when you do look at a human heart, they don't look anything like what we show as a romantic heart. The church eventually, of course, said you can't cut open people. That's violation and sacrilege. So they cut open animals. And when you look at a bird heart, the bird heart actually looks a little bit more like what we would call a heart. And so the first depiction of a heart in art is this tapestry from the 1400s. And here's a little gift heart that's being given. And the Sacred Heart of Christ wasn't depicted until the 1600s. So the heart image is very recent. My theory, and it's not just mine, is that the heart is part of the anatomy, and women use this to accentuate that part of the anatomy, because our heart does not look anything like the anatomical heart. And the Valentine, of course, has to do with Saint Valentine, who was killed by Claudius. There were a couple of different Valentines who were killed by popes. But anyway, and if you remember your Roman history, the Lupercale was this great celebration to the god fertility faunus, and they would sacrifice animals. And then the med would cut the animal skins into strips, run around the villages, and slap the women with their strips. And then they would pull a name out of a vase that the woman was carrying, and it had all the names of the women. And that allowed the two as a couple to go off in the woods and maybe eventually marry, but at least have some fun on the Lupercale. This is a 22,000-year-old image. Unfortunately, this is what it looks like, but people basically have photoshopped it in most of the images so it looks like a heart, but this is probably not really a heart. This is maybe a wound. The Greeks, of course, had many terms for love. This is very common. People talk about the different forms. The Bible uses 4 of these words. To me, the great love, of course, and there are there are lots of loves. The storge, the familial love, the babies and children, the ludus love, which is playful and flirtatious, but philia, friendship. There's also another word, hava, ava, which means I love, but also I give. And it's not only showing affection, but it's an active process. The neocortex in humans, of course, in the last 2 million years has been ballooning. And so and it also has to do with our social groupings. It also means that we interact. Probably, this is Robin Dunbar, who studied human groups over time. And we had our kin, which is our immediate family. We had probably had a super family that we traveled with, and maybe once a year we would meet with the clan, and maybe twice or 3 times a year we would meet with the tribe, and that tribe would be 150 people. And that was important because you didn't want to marry into your super family because that would be incest or dangerous genetically. So he thinks this Dunbar's number tells us how many people we can keep track of emotionally. And it's still very, very true in terms of numbers. And trouble is that over time, our intimate contacts decrease. And I also think that this means that the people closest to us often are our friends, and they're our pillars in terms of relationships. And friendships are very, very different in terms of what they do for us. They sync our brain waves when we're with each other. You know, there's a wonderful Spanish term, simpatico. They help you with challenges. They reduce your stress. If you have good friends, you live longer, you stay fitter, you relax, you're healthier. And friendship is really vital right now. So at the same time, we also realize that we have friends in another class, in another group. And we love animals. And animals, I think, love us. And animals love animals. And you notice they exchange scents. So what do we call this? I've actually laid awake at night thinking about all this. Yes, loving a dog, that's canophilia. Loving a cat, felinophilia. But maybe it's just this. We have a compulsive love of pets, which I would call co-love. Or maybe we should call it a zoomance because we love animals. Maybe you're polyplastic and you love all kinds of animals. But anyway, love is more than just romance, more than just friendship. It's love of our animal companions. And it's also love of the planet we live on. The symbols of love I hope you know these. Next time we'll talk about attraction. We'll talk about fidelity. We'll talk about divorce. We'll talk about marriage first, and then we'll talk about divorce, and then we'll talk about the future of love.